Okay, I think I'll get this started. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis, and I'm the president of the Danish Atheist Society, to those of you who don't know that. And I'm happy to see so many people here tonight. I hope more people will turn up. Some people look very confused when they walk outside, so maybe they'll find their way back here. I'm not surprised to see so many people because it's Maryam Namazie giving a talk, and she's not anybody. She is, as probably all of you know, she is originally from Iran, but fled the country back in 1980, and has since then lived in different countries such as India and the US, and since 2000 in the UK. So Maryam Namazie is a very well-recognized human rights activist, and mainly known perhaps for her work as the spokesperson for the One Law for All campaign against Sharia law, but also the spokesperson of the Council of Ex-Muslims in Britain, and for various groups campaigning against stoning and for women's rights in Iran and other countries. So she has received numerous recognitions for her work, and I'm very happy to introduce to you Maryam Namazie. Please, Maryam.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. I'm not speaking too loud, am I? No, okay, good. Good, relax. So I wanted to speak to you about Sharia law and universal rights, secularism, things that are quite important in the world that we live in today. I still get quite frustrated at the lack of support for women's rights campaigners and human rights campaigners against Sharia law, and actually oftentimes in defense of Islamism. And so I want to talk to you about some of these issues: multiculturalism and cultural relativism, which I hate, the far right, which I hate as well, and the pro-Islamist left, which I hate too. And I think this is a very complex issue. There's a wonderful Algerian journalist who says that simplicity is killing us. And I think part of the problem we have is this. It's become either or. You're either for or against. You're either, your enemy's enemy is your friend, and that ends the discussion and debate. And plus you add into this mix post-colonial guilt and the concept of criticizing Islam being seen to be racism, the real racism that exists in societies. And then you have a situation in which human rights campaigners are often silenced, and Islamists are often supported and given red carpet treatment over the dead bodies of many, many people resisting it in the Middle East and North Africa, but also here in Europe. So it's a very difficult issue, but I wanted to throw out some ideas. I guess they're considered controversial. I don't know why. I think they're actually very basic concepts of, citizenship, universal rights, secularism, freedom of expression, things that I thought we should have taken for granted, but we seem not to be able to any longer. So I do want to throw those out, and I hope that we'll have a really good discussion on this issue. I'm going to try and speak for 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and then I'd like to open it up to you for your comments, questions, responses, because I think that's where we get the best discussions taking place, when we have this back and forth happening. From my perspective, I think Sharia law is an abomination. I think it's a scandal. It's a human rights scandal of gigantic proportions. And I find it outrageous that it can be excused and supported by people who are often seen to be progressive and on the left, and feminists and so on and so forth. Not everyone, of course, but one of the questions I always get asked is, why can't we just accommodate Sharia law? Why can't we accommodate parts of it? And I guess my response is, if you can accommodate misogyny, go ahead and try doing it. If you can accommodate homophobia in a civil society, try and do that. But I think actually Sharia law is antithetical to human rights, to freedoms, and to women's rights and equality. Now, one of the ways in which Sharia law is advancing in the West in particular is its focus on family matters. You know, they'll say things like, well, why are you scaremongering? We're not asking for stonings in city squares or for amputations. All we want is Sharia law's family code. You know, mundane issues, they call it, with regards to child custody, marriage, divorce, and so on and so forth. And our response is basically that these mundane issues are actually pillars of women's oppression under Islamic rule. If you look at Sharia's family code, yes, you're not stoning people to death, but the misogyny in a law that stones someone to death, that actually buries them in a ditch and decides the size of the stone that has to be used, that misogyny exists to a lesser degree, but it's still there in a law that denies women the right to divorce in many instances, that says women should be relegated to a life of violence, that says child custody goes to the father at a preset age irrespective of the welfare of the child. And, you know, just to give you a couple of examples, if you look at Sharia courts in Britain, and what I always find interesting is actually when you compare a Sharia court in Britain to one in Iran, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And that's, I think, quite scary when you think about it. You know, you have a Sharia judge in Britain saying that marital rape is not a crime. Calling it rape is the aggression, not marital rape in and of itself, because you know, when people get married, women should be expected to have sex when required. And you have quotes on the Sharia court websites explaining why a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's. So under Sharia law, you need two women to corroborate the testimony of one man. And they explain it very well. They say, well, it's because, you know, women are too emotional and they don't think reasonably and with reason, and therefore they need a man there to corroborate what they're thinking. And so they've got justifications for this, but this is actually the law for quite a lot of people living in Europe. We're not talking about Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. And I think this is the first point that I want to raise, is family matters are just as important as criminal matters. Just because, as one human rights campaigner says, it's denying women's rights in the family doesn't make it less scandalous and less important. The other issue is on the issue of choice. You know, you often hear when people defend Sharia courts, they'll say, well, people choose to go to these courts. You know, they're adult women, they have a right to use whatever mechanism they want in order to address family matters, because in Britain, as in Canada, as in other places, Australia, for example, I don't know about Denmark, there's an arbitration act, do you have that here? Where you're allowed to arbitrate using any judge and any law you want. And the idea behind it is mainly for specialized things like business, where you want someone with a really good in-depth business knowledge about the issue you're addressing, and you prefer someone specialized in that area to actually be the judge, and the two parties going in agree beforehand that they will abide by whatever decision this specialist has made. And there are 300 arbitration courts in Britain, for example. We don't have a problem with arbitration courts. The problem, though, is when religious laws are being used, medieval religious laws are being used to arbitrate on family matters. And that's what the problem is. That's what they tried to do in Canada, and a campaign managed to stop it, and what they're doing in Britain and in Germany and in other places as well. So it's the issue of, first of all, choice. It's hard to really say how voluntary going to these courts are for a lot of people. If you look at the evidence that exists, there's a lot of evidence that there's pressure involved. For example, you have one woman professor at the University of Reading. She's a law professor. She sat in on 10 court cases and found that out of the 10, 4 women had civil injunctions against their husbands for violent and threatening behavior. But nonetheless, their husbands had dragged them into a parallel legal system in order to renegotiate the financial settlements as well as child custody issues. There's other cases. There's the Center for Islamic Pluralism. They did a study of 90 Muslim women, and they found that a majority of the women were not satisfied with these courts. And they gave quite a number of examples. One of them was of a 13-year-old girl who'd been forcibly married. She went to 3 Sharia courts, and all of them said her marriage was valid. And in the report she says, but I told them I was forced, and they said it doesn't matter, the marriage is valid. And at the age of 30, this is a British woman living in Britain, her divorce finally came through only because her husband gave it to her. So she never received justice from the Sharia courts. And I think it's actually, they're kangaroo courts, they're sham courts. They perpetrate injustice. How can they give women and men justice? So these are just some examples that I'm throwing out there to just give you examples of how it's discriminatory. A lot of proponents of Sharia law will say, where's the evidence? And no matter how much evidence you give them, they'll keep saying, where's the evidence? We want more evidence. Prove that it's discriminatory. And my argument is, even if you can't find one woman coming forward to say that they were discriminated against, you should know that discrimination is taking place. Why? Because the law itself is discriminatory. It's like saying no black person has come forward in South Africa to say that racial apartheid is discriminatory, so I won't accept that it's discriminatory. Prove it to me. You don't need that because the law itself says a woman's testimony is worth half of a man's, girls get half what boys do in inheritance, men have the unilateral right to divorce, women don't. And when it comes to child custody, whereas laws in Europe, for example, have reached a point where the welfare of the child is paramount, under Sharia, religious dogma states that the father gets the child at a preset age, irrespective of the welfare of the child. So there's, a lot of human rights policies, public policies that are being violated as a result of these courts. On the issue of choice as well, I personally believe that we're living under an Islamic Inquisition, and therefore you can't necessarily compare a Sharia court to any other religious court, though I'm opposed to all religious courts. But in a situation where if you draw a cartoon, you can be threatened to death, and in a situation where if you're Muslim and you don't wear a veil, you can be threatened to death, in Britain, we're not talking about Iran, we know what it's like there. In that situation, how real are the choices for so many people who have to go to these courts, given the pressures that they face? And a lot of Muslim women have said that they didn't have to go to these courts 30, 40 years ago. They have to go to them now. And I think this is what is key here for me, is the far right often blames immigrants. And the reality is that it's not about immigration, because there are many Islamists who are actually European-born and bred. And there are many immigrants who are at the forefront of fighting against Islamism and Sharia law. So it's not about immigrants and Muslim immigrants. It's about a political movement, a right-wing political movement that actually was brought to center stage as a result of US foreign policy. If you remember, during the Cold War, the US government had a policy of creating a green belt around the Soviet Union at the time. And it was at that time that, for example, in Iran, they supported eventually an Islamic state in Iran. And we know that they've supported the Taliban in Afghanistan during that time as well. So it's kind of, it's not really true to blame immigrants for Islamism. And it's important to look at the reasons for the growth of Islamism as a political movement that's also rooted in Western government appeasement of Islamism and its opposition only to the terrorist wing of Islamism rather than the entire political movement. I want to say a few other things, and then I'm going to try to end so we can have a discussion. I think the problem is that there is a cone of silence on this issue. I know that very often I'm faced with, you know, places I'm supposed to speak get cancelled, interviews never get broadcast. There is this huge cone of silence around this issue, whether it's as a result of self-censorship, because people don't want to address a controversial issue, and also because any sort of criticism is seen to be racist. And the reality is that what's happening now in European societies is that it's the far right that seems to be the most vocal about Islamism and Sharia law. And the problem is that the far right have become very savvy. So they're not anymore very often the swastika-bearing Nazis from the past. They have Jewish, you know, groups and women's groups and gay groups like the English Defence League in Britain. They become very savvy and they're using rights language in order to promote their racist agendas. And what happens is that it's becoming very difficult for people in general to distinguish between these groups, because they will often say, we're not racist, we're not against Muslims, we're not against immigrants, we're against Sharia law and we're against Islamism. But actually, if you look at their tactics and their aims and what they do at their rallies, what sort of, you know, the attacks on Muslims and immigrants at their rallies, the fact that a lot of Nazis are associated with them. If you look a little deeper, you can see actually the links between them and the far right and how they are a far right movement. Now, I think we have to be very careful if good people don't speak up against Sharia law and against Islamism. You leave the field open for the far right to do it with its inhuman and anti-immigrant and racist agenda. And it's dangerous, it's dangerous. I know there are people who will often say to me, you should be working with the far right. And I think the point is that actually you can't work with the far right because it's like working with the Islamists. Islamism is our far right. And they're exactly the same. If you look at the aims of the far right, if you look at their tactics, their strategies, their misogyny, their homophobia, their anti-Semitism, their use of violence, threats, intimidation, and so on and so forth, and scapegoating of entire populations, blaming them for, you know, the far right will blame all immigrants and Muslims for Islamists, and the Islamists will bomb every bus and discotheque they can get their hands on because they blame everybody for, you know, US government policy, for example. And this conflating people with political movements and so on and so forth. They've got a lot of similarities. So I think it's important actually to step up and say something about this issue, because if we don't, we leave it open to the far right. The second thing that's important, I think, is that it is crucial for the left, the progressives, the humanists, the secularists, the atheists, the free thinkers, to be vocal about this issue. The problem is, right now, it's considered racism if you do. And oftentimes this is perpetrated by these progressive groups themselves. And I always think, well, how can it be racism to defend equality? How can it be racist to say that people shouldn't have different standards applying to them? Why can't they all be treated like 21st century humanity, you know? So in that sense, I actually find multiculturalism and cultural relativism very racist, in that it denies people equal rights by saying it's their culture, it's their religion. And I think eventually we choose what side we want to take, don't we? I mean, not every culture is homogeneous. There are so many differences of opinion within any given community. And we, I think, people, free thinkers, secularists, people on the left, progressives, women's rights campaigners, feminists, they need to side with the culture of people who are saying no. You know, it's like the campaign that started saying honor killing is not our culture, stoning is not my culture, it's not many people's culture. So it's a question of choosing between the Islamic Republic of Iran, Islamism, or choosing the culture of people who are resisting day in and day out. Whose side are we going to choose? And right now, from where I'm standing, there seems to be very little solidarity and support for the Arab Spring, for protests in Iran, and for Muslim, and I put that in quotes, Muslim women and communities in our neighborhoods and countries. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, if we don't speak up, who will? And when are we going to eventually speak up? When it's too late? So I'm going to end here and hope that we can get some more discussions going on the issue of multiculturalism, cultural relativism, on why secularism is so important, and how we can actually show real solidarity with people, not by bombing them, obviously. I'm talking about people-to-people solidarity. The solidarity that existed against racial apartheid in South Africa. Where is that solidarity against sexual apartheid? It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is manifold, but when are we going to take the steps to actually side with the people that need our support? And in a sense, by doing that, we can help push back Islamism and strengthen universal values, secularism, and citizenship. I'll just end by saying rights are not Western, they're not Eastern. I mean, I often hear about this clash of civilizations. Well, there are people in Iran who are fighting harder and stronger for secularism, who've never left their villages, than possibly people sitting in Copenhagen. So don't say it's a Western value, and don't say that Eastern values are stoning and amputations, because there are people resisting and risking their lives in order to push back Islamism. So this is about human values. It's not us and them. It's a lot of us, including people in Iran, versus people, including people in America, across the world, versus reaction, versus the far right, Islamism, and European far right as well. So, you know, there are people in these cities that we should be fighting against, politically, I mean, and people on the smallest corners of you know, the Middle East and North Africa that are our allies and we should be supporting. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm holding two mics because we are recording tonight, which also means that when we open up for questions in just a minute, I would like you to line up over here and ask your questions in this small mic, because otherwise we don't get the sound. And also speak up a bit. Either hold two mics if you can, and otherwise just speak up so we can hear it in the room. But before we open up for questions, I would just like to mention that Maryam brought a few books. These two, whoops. This one is Sharia Law in Britain, and Enemies Not Allies, the Far Right. And you can buy both of them. The Sharia Law one for 50 kroner, and the Enemies Not Allies for 85, or both of them together for 100. And there are a few of them up here, but you can just come up after we're finished here if you're interested. And then questions, please line up over here. Questions, comments, anything. And I think Jakob will take over here.
Oh, okay. I think I have a question for you. You explained how Sharia law has come into the British society. I would like to know, how can a democratic society like Britain, and which we compare ourselves to here in Denmark, we are also a democratic country, and many others are. I mean, for me, it's difficult to imagine how it could start like that in Denmark. But maybe they have some special rules in Britain we don't know about, or something like that. Thank you very much.
Oh, can I actually get a few comments and questions? Don't worry, I don't get nervous if there's silence. That way I'm not talking the whole time, because I love to talk and it will get dangerous for you guys. So I've got your question, I'll just wait to hear from anybody else. And I won't look at anyone. Nice building. No, please. I'll start begging soon.
Hello. My name is Elmas Berg, and I'm the spokesperson of a women's rights movement called Q Freedom in Denmark. And we are, I want to ask you, are you a member of Q Freedom? Because you are exactly talking the way we are working upon. And I want to ask you how we can develop, because it is, we've been attacked from 3 sides since we've started the movement. And it's, as you said, it's not a matter of choosing between right or left. It's human rights we are fighting to achieve here. And I was wondering, because there is a movement in Denmark now working towards getting the Sharia courts in Vollsmose and Gellerup as well here in Denmark, and we're fighting it, obviously. How it started, and what if the English law contradicts with the Sharia law? What do the women do? And I wonder if you could give us some advice how to approach it here in Denmark, because it's really, really hard to get through to the Danes. Mm-hmm.
What are your general views on hate crime laws?
Hate crime laws.
There's a group of people who criticize Islam, and your idea is that there are some who are actually just criticizing Islam, like yourself, for good reasons, and then there are the far-right racists. And my question is, because I'm not far-right at all, I'm actually slightly left-wing, but my impression is that there are very few who are actually racist. Or, I mean, I think the clear majority of those who criticize Islam is actually, you know, like yourself, just with knowledge of how it is actually. What do you think about that?
Okay, shall I respond to these then? I'll start with yours, if I may. I think that everybody has a right to criticize Islam, whether they're far right or whether I like them or not, whether I like their politics or not. I think freedom of expression matters most when you're criticizing that which is taboo and that which is sacred. And in a sense, I think there is no greater act of freedom of expression than criticizing Islam today. Because of the threats and the intimidations that follow, and because it has become impossible to publish a cartoon. You know, it's become impossible to name a teddy bear Muhammad. It's, you know, it's become absurd. But people's lives are being threatened for what, you know, for any sort of, not even criticism of Islam, but just poking fun of it, and even just using it in a way that's deemed to be, you know, not sacred. So in that sense, you know, I will support the right of people to criticize Islam. But I do think how the criticism takes place is important as well. You know, look, George Bush says he attacked Iraq for women's rights, and I'm a women's rights campaigner, but I don't believe him. Yeah? It's possible. It's possible that a politician will say something, that they've done something for a reason, and even though they're using terminology you might use, you know there's something not right there. I know he didn't attack Iraq for women's rights. I know he doesn't care about women's rights, and women will always be the first people he will sacrifice, or that policy will sacrifice if they can. So it's the same with the far right. They might be using language I'm using, in the sense of saying they're against Islam, they're against Sharia law. But there are distinctions, and I think there are key distinctions. For example, they will often blame immigrants. And I think the very fact that you blame one of the most vulnerable groups in a given society with the least amount of rights, with the least amount of visibility, and blame them for a reactionary movement that actually has been at the forefront of killing them first and foremost. One of the reasons many of them are here are because of that movement. There is racism behind that. You know, it's blaming people and blaming groups of people, the most vulnerable people, for the acts of a regressive social movement and political movement that actually Western governments have had a bigger hand in bringing to center stage than those very vulnerable, poor immigrants sitting, you know. Islamism was not concocted in an immigrant's kitchen. It was not. And so that alone, that brings alarm bells for me. Blaming immigrants, blaming Muslims. My father's a Muslim, he hates Islamism. It's, you know, just because someone has an identity, it's not equivalent to a choice or politics. Because every group is not one homogeneous group, as I explained before. There are millions of opinions and characteristics within a given group of Muslim and immigrant. There are socialists among those immigrants, free thinkers, atheists, people who have risked their lives or lost many a loved one in this battle against Islamism. So please do not blame them for this movement. Who are the first victims of Islamism? These very immigrants and Muslims that this far right keeps pointing its fingers at. So that in itself is a problem for me. Then you have the far right criticizing Islam. They say Islam is not a religion. Yes, it is. Go and look at the Bible. Do you think you can find many better things in the Bible than in the Torah or the Quran? I'm sorry, I don't think so. I don't think so. The only reason Christianity, and I'm not going to upset a couple of people here, but that's just what I do. The only reason Christianity seems cuddlier, the only reason it's at soup kitchens feeding the hungry is because it doesn't have the same political power it had during the Inquisition. That's the difference. And because we are living under an Islamic Inquisition, Islam kills, it slaughters anyone who transgresses, because we are living under an Islamic Inquisition. And that's why I use that example, because that example is very real. Today, Islamism is hanging apostates in city centers. It is digging ditches and stoning people to death. And that's why its link to a political movement is making us concerned about it. As you know, Geert Wilders wants the Quran to be banned. Well, was the Bible banned to push back the Inquisition? No, an enlightenment pushed back the Inquisition. And that's what we need today, an enlightenment against Islam and Islamism. And this is what the far right doesn't see. They are defending Christian values against Islamic ones. What they don't know is that the Europe we have today is a result of the fight against religion and Christianity, not because of Christianity. These are not Christian values. They are human values that were fought for. Good. I wasn't sure if I was going to get tomatoes or, okay, good. That's positive. So I think, and that's why when I say, there's so many differences. I have some far-right people who've joined the One Law for All campaign. If I know who they are, I'll take their ears and throw them out. But of course, someone signed a petition, you don't know who they are. But let's say they've signed the One Law for campaign against Sharia law in Britain. So I send them information about Sakina Mohammadi Ashtiani being stoned to death in Iran. I think this person must care about someone being stoned to death in Iran. They're against Sharia law, they're against Islamism. I get an email saying, that Muslim bitch deserves to die. That's what she deserves, she's a Muslim. And that's what I mean. This far-right movement is like Islamism, because those are the same emails I get from Islamists about people like me, people who are different who transgress their norms. And so I think if you're against Islam, fine, you can be against Islam however way you want. But the people I want in my movement are people who are pro-human rights, who are pro-women's rights, who are pro-secularism, who don't think Christianity is wonderful and Islam is dirty and evil. And no matter what their beliefs, they might even be very religious. There are a lot of Muslims who are members of the One Law for All campaign. They know that religion in political power is dangerous. They know it's dangerous in the state, in the educational system, in the judicial system. And that's why secularism is something the far right doesn't fight for. And that's what distinguishes us. So there are distinctions to be made. There are distinctions to be made. The US government is against the Islamic Republic of Iran. I am against the Islamic Republic of Iran. But we are not part of the same movement. We are not part of the same movement. And that's why I think we need to be vigilant against the far right. You know, we need to be vigilant. And unfortunately, because they've become so savvy, and because the pathetic excuse of a European left is so pro-Islamist, that people are wondering, well, isn't it better to have them than nothing at all? No. No, because they are leading us down the same road that Islamists are leading us down. A dangerous road, a bleak and dark road that is inhuman, intolerant, and unacceptable. So, yeah, so distinctions, yeah. Now, on Q freedom, I'm sorry, that word freedom also often brings up alarm bells with me, because the far right, I'm not saying that's your group, but the far right has started using words of freedom. You know, we're the, I don't know, Swedish Democrats, we're the Freedom Party, and they sound very good, you know, but I will judge any organization and manifesto by what it says, because I think by what it says you can tell quite a lot, because, and not only what it says, what it does. It's not enough for the US government to say it's pro-women's rights. It has to show that it is. Otherwise, it isn't. You know, and any organization that says they're against Sharia, they have to be pro-women's rights. They have to be pro-secularism. They have to be against religion's role in the state, in the educational system and judicial system for me to believe them. So I'm not saying, I'm not making a judgment because I don't know. So
I'm also a Muslim who hates Islamism.
Oh, okay. Okay. On the issue of hate crimes, you have to go out. That was a very difficult question. I don't like it. Go outside. Well, I mean, I think that the reality is that we have enough laws to prosecute people that carry out criminal acts. And I don't think we need to create more laws that protect religion, because the last thing that needs protecting is religion. We need protection from religion, not the other way around. Honestly, we need protection. Protect us, you know. So in that sense, I think that I'm very, very, I find this push for these sorts of laws are really another way of religious political movements, particularly Islamism, followed by other religious movements, pushing for privilege and pushing for a silencing of any criticism. So I think we need to be really wary of that. How does this happen? Exactly. How does this happen? It still astonishes me. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why it happens. You know, you will find, even though there are over 85 Sharia courts in Britain, according to their own statements, they have tried, one type of court has tried 7,000 cases. Anjem Choudhury, that wants Sharia law for Britain, you know who he is? He's this Islamist who has tried to set up Sharia-controlled zones in Britain and gay-free zones in Britain, who is part of Hizb ut-Tahrir and Al-Muhajirun. He has set up a Sharia court and carried out, according to his own statement, 1,000 marriages. So how does this happen? And I think it happens when government when government relegates its responsibilities towards its citizens to middlemen, parasitical, self-appointed imams and heads of Islamic organizations who have taken representation of an entire community that they are stifling. And the more control they have, the less women are able to walk without a veil, the less people can say they're gay, the less people can think freely and outside of the box. And I think this is what multiculturalism has done. It has created ghettos of various cultures, and it's handed over authority and running of those cultures to these parasites and these reactionaries. And I think that's one way it happens. The other way it happens is when people who are meant to be the banner carriers of social justice and equality, the progressives, the left, the feminists, the human rights organizations, they are not only silent, they actively defend Sharia law as people's right to religion. We had a rally in front of Downing Street last year, or whenever, 2 years ago. Al-Muhajirun, which is this Islamic organization that wants Sharia law for Britain, they had a counter demonstration against us. Unite against fascism. Sounds good. They're against fascism. They march towards our rally. Who do they join? Who do they join? They join Al-Muhajirun, they join the Islamists, and they come with slogans of Allahu Akbar. This is the anti-fascist for you. You know, so this is, in a sense, what happens is when people are not only staying silent, I wish they would just stay silent, you know, but they're actually proactively defending Islamism and Sharia law. You have humanist organizations in Britain saying Sharia law is religious freedom. Is it really? Is canon law religious freedom for the priests to evade accountability for their pedophilia? How come that's not religious freedom? But when it comes to Muslims and Muslim minority communities, suddenly a Sharia court is religious freedom. Religious freedom is for people, not for courts, not for states. Don't forget that. They're completely rewriting what it means to have religious freedom, what secularism means. Now suddenly we've got hundreds of versions of secularism. No, we've had one. You're trying to water it down because you want religion to bulldoze over us. Well, secularists need to stand firm and say there's a definition that says strict separation of religion from the state. So it's a host of things. Another is the fact that the British government, and I think many European governments, believe that by appeasing the political wing of Islamism, they can stop its terrorist wing. They don't understand that these two work together, and that Sharia law is a form of terrorism. It is a form of terrorism. And just because, you know, you're worried about 9/11 and 7/7 in London, what about the decades of this terrorism on populations in the Middle East and North Africa that you weren't worried about? You know, this movement has slaughtered entire generations in that region. People still in mass graves today. And, you know, if you think that you're going to appease this movement by letting it have its Sharia courts and its burqas and this and that, while all the while it's basically using these to advance and gain strength and gain a foothold into society. Look, I know the Islamists haven't been able to set up Islamic emirates in Britain, but the fact that they put posters on the streets to say this is our zone and come up and say we have our own army monitoring these roads and we'll tell women who are not veiled that they need to veil, that shows the power they feel. That shows the power they feel. Don't be mistaken to think, you know, you'll have people in Britain saying, well, they haven't done it really, stop scaremongering. Or these courts really don't have legal standing. Yes, they do. They're using the Arbitration Act. They're using the Arbitration Act. That gives it legal standing. You know, so I think it's a whole host of things. But I think, first and foremost, it's the fact that good people are remaining silent for fears of being labeled racist, for fear. I think this movement is scary. That's another reality. We have to be frank about it. It is a very scary movement that threatens people very easily. But there is strength in numbers, and there are a lot of us who are still alive. So it's obviously not that scary. And I think in reality, they are scared of us because we do, I strongly believe that we represent a majority, but that majority needs to come forward. If it doesn't come forward, they are going to carry on bulldozing over us. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, I can't speak English, but I tell in Persian and Maryam can translate if it's possible. همین توی کوپنهاگ دولت جمهوری اسلامی مسجدی درست کرد که 10 میلیون پولش دادش. همینجا یه تظاهراتی توی رودخوسپلاتسن برگزار شد علیه این و شهرداری اینجا بهش راه داد. این به خاطر این نیستش که جمهوری اسلامی میخواد که خیلی دلش برای مسلمان‌ها اینجا سوخته. از این طریق دست و پای خودش دراز میکنه و درست میکنه و من خودم شاهد کسی بودم، یه زنی بودم که به فاصله خیلی کوتاهی که من میدونستم این خیلی آدم باز و بدون حجاب و این چیزا بود، الان یه آدمی شده بود که حاضر به خودش بمب ببنده و بیاد تو خیابون. اینطوری عوض شده بود و با یه حجاب خیلی تمام عیار. نه توی این دختر توی مالموه، ولی قذافی و جمهوری اسلامی پولای گنده‌ای میده برای اینکه بتونه این قدرت خودشو توی این کشورهای اروپایی زیاد کنه.
I'll just repeat the question, or the comment. It's about the fact that there's a mosque being built here in Copenhagen that you must all know about. It's actually being funded by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and she's talking about how this is actually not because the Islamic Republic of Iran wants a place of worship for Muslims, but the fact that it's using this mosque as a way of bringing in its Islamism, basically. I'll wait for a few more questions and comments and then I'll respond to that.
Jeg hedder Lone Nørgaard. Thank you for your speech and thank you for your enthusiasm. I heartily agree with some parts of your presentation, but I also disagree. And I think it's necessary to contradict each other because this is the way we all get wiser, hopefully. First of all, you say that the issue of Sharia is not about Muslim immigration. I have to use my logical sense and ask you this question: how can you make a distinction between Sharia law and Muslim immigration? Because we would have no trouble with Sharia law unless many millions of immigrants from Arab and Muslim countries had come to Europe. So this was the first part. Secondly, your presentation of the Muslim population being very, very vulnerable, I believe this is only part of the picture because most Muslim immigrants are not political refugees. They come to this country because they already have got family members here. The third point I would like to make is that you state that Islam is a religion, and you are right. But Islam is more than a religion. Islam is also, I'm sorry to say, a political ideology. And I think it's necessary to include this aspect. You can't speak about Islam without talking about politics as well. And therefore you can't put Christianity and Islam on a common denominator. There is a very, very vast difference. And if you have a knowledge of Christianity and a knowledge of Islam, you will see that they can't be compared the way you do. And the most important reason is that Islam has got a political program, and Islam has rules which pervade the entire individual's life down to the very minutest detail. Compared to Christianity, which does not have a political program. The fourth point I would like to make...
This is Denmark, by the way.
Yeah. I would very much like you to make a definition of the far right, because the way you have presented the far right, I can't really recognize the people I work together with. I've been very much into this Sharia thing for the last 8 years, and I have a hard time following you. There was a program on Danish television recently on the is it English or British Defence League, and the spokesman actually sounded very much down to earth, and there was no racism in his speech. The final comment I would like to make is when you ask the question, why are people silent? I wish that you were right, that it was because people were afraid. I'm afraid it's because people are very, very ignorant about the danger. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Unlike the former speaker, who's a prominent Danish right-wing pseudo-feminist, I am right-wing, I am good. What can I actually do?
Are you serious?
What? Yes, of course I am. Because you wish that we do something, and I'm not saying that I'm all helpless, I just don't know what actions to take.
Okay, can I actually respond to these? There's too many now, and then we'll come back. Okay. Okay. Lots of food for thought. Well, on the issue of the mosque, I think again, the issue is not that people don't have a right to religion and a right to worship. You know, in a place of religious worship. The point is, though, that given the fact that we live in a world in which Islamism has such political power, that everything is not just as simple as it seems. A mosque is not necessarily always a mosque. It might be, you know. And the fact that this is funded by one of the pillars of Islamism worldwide should make people's alarm bells start going off. Because I think it's clear with the Islamic Republic of Iran being one of the main pillars of Islamism, in promoting Islamism and advancing it internationally, that it will have the effect of both radicalizing, which I hate that word because I think being radical is not a bad thing, but of Islamicizing immigrant populations by having more access to them. And also by being used as a base by the Islamic regime to be able to not only advance its own propaganda, but also spy on exiles, and which is a major issue that's been found in other mosques related to the Islamic Republic of Iran. For example, the same foundation that's building the mosque here built the one in Germany, which had links to the assassination of 4 Iranian exiles in Mykonos. So there is that direct link as well. So in a sense, again, that's why I think it's not so simple, the issue of the mosque. It depends where the funding for the mosque comes. But when it comes clearly from the Islamic Republic of Iran, I think we need to be able to look at it and challenge and question it. Now, going back to more important issues, sorry. Now, Sharia is not about Muslim immigration, and I'm going to repeat that again. And I think the reality is that there are Muslims who have lived in Europe for centuries. And the demand for Sharia law is a very recent demand. It's a very recent demand. If you look at the establishment of Sharia courts in Britain, they come in the mid-80s after the establishment of an Islamic Republic of Iran and the rise of Islamism internationally. So there's a direct link to it. So there have been immigrants living in many European countries in the West for a very long time. This is a very new phenomenon. And its application also in the Middle East and North Africa, in many instances, is a relatively new phenomenon. I'm talking about contemporary political Islam. So what happens, though, is when you blame an entire group for Sharia law, you make the mistake of, first of all, attacking people who are your allies, because many of these people will have fled Sharia law and have fought, you know, someone like Farideh spent, I don't know, 30 years or more fighting against Islamism. Her husband was assassinated by the regime. Your husband, right? شوهرت رو کشتن نه؟ آره. There are a lot of examples like this. So what you do is, oh, immigrants, it's them. They're bringing Sharia law. What you don't see is actually a lot of us damn immigrants are doing all your dirty work for you, fighting against Islamism in the way you wouldn't dare fight against it. And we are putting our lives on the line day in and day out. So don't you dare say that it is immigrants that are responsible for Islamism. You know, in Iran, it's US-led foreign policy that has a lot more to do with the rise of Islamism in that country. The Iranian revolution was not an Islamic revolution. It was a left-leaning one. An entire generation of wonderful, decent people were slaughtered in Iran for Islamism to gain a foothold. And still today, they are killing left, right, and center in order to maintain power. And many European governments have the closest relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran, with the Saudi government, so please do not tell us that immigrants are to blame. And thank you. And second of all, if you look at the greatest proponents of Sharia law in Europe, Anjem Choudary, British-born, what are you going to do with him? Sadeghi Conlon in Australia, who wants Sharia law in Australia, Australian-born from a Christian fundamentalist family. This is politics. It's politics. Just because America's at war with Japan, you can't just take every Japanese citizen and put them in a camp or deport them all. Because it's politics. It's not about identity alone. There are millions of characteristics that define people. I am also an atheist. I am also a communist. I am also a women's rights campaigner. I am also a mother. I am also an ex-Muslim. I am also an anti-Sharia camp. I am a million things. I am not just, I'm sorry, it's my turn to talk. I am not just an immigrant. I am not just an immigrant. And this is the problem. This is what the far right does exactly. Is it blames and scapegoats an entire population, exactly what the Islamists do. Exactly what the Islamists do. Two sides of the same mirror, two sides of the same coin. On the issue of, you know, most Muslims who are here, first of all, who says we're Muslims? Who says we're Muslims? Just because of where we're born, we're automatically labeled Muslims. That's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true. I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. You know, so one is, who says, it's like saying everybody from Denmark belongs to the Danish People's Party. Is that true? No. And not everyone in Denmark is a Christian that wants Christianity's role in the state as it exists today. There are a lot of people who don't like it, possibly. Not everybody thinks the same. Why do you think that Muslims or immigrants all think the same? They don't. They don't. And even if a majority of Muslims and immigrants in this country are not political refugees, but they came to join their families, I don't care. Because if you live in Iran, listening to music is a political crime. You may laugh at that. Wearing what you want is a crime. Being gay is a crime. Being a free thinker is a crime. Having sex outside of marriage is a crime. Being a woman is a crime. Being human is a crime. So anything you do is political. And therefore, in my opinion, anyone coming from Iran, even if they join their family, is a political refugee. I don't care if the Danish government doesn't concede that or accept that. Now, on the issue of the English Defence League, that's what I've said. They are savvy. They are savvy in the same way that Islamists will go up and down the country telling us that Islam is a religion of peace and Sharia law helps women and actually treats women equally. You have to go beyond the words. And that's why we've written this report on the English Defence League. It would be great if you bought it to learn something about these groups. But also, it's free on the internet if you don't want to buy it. But there are ample examples of this wonderful English Defence League that sounds very reasonable, that has said, if we let our lads loose, they'll kill all of them. Who's all of them? Who's all of them? Sees everyone as enemies, who's attacked Muslims and immigrants at demonstrations, and who have very close links with the swastika-bearing far right and the neo-Nazi movement. So I would suggest that you read this if you think the EDL is not racist. On what to do. I mean, you know, the thing that I always find a dilemma is that people are always saying, well, why aren't more Muslims speaking up? And I think actually there are quite a lot of Muslims speaking up, but apart from that fact, I think that if people don't speak up generally, you know, if a lot of people who aren't living in a community where Islamists have a stronghold, where they're being forced to go to courts and so on and so forth, if they don't see vocal opposition and support, how do you expect them to be able to speak up if you're not able to speak up or you're not willing to speak up? One of the things that I found very interesting is I was involved in the campaign against Sharia law in Canada. And it was a campaign that was successful in pushing back Sharia law there. It was actually a colleague of mine, Homa Arjamand, who led the campaign, and I had gone to one of the first public meetings to speak, and we were very involved in the campaign there. Something I found out just recently, actually, was a women's rights campaigner that has contact with the Muslim Women's Association that came out very vocally against Sharia law in Canada. At a recent meeting, they had said that actually, if it hadn't been for Homa Arjamand, who's a secularist, an atheist, if she hadn't come forward, they would most likely not have been able to come forward, because what she did was create a space in order for people to be able to speak. Now, I suppose if there's this cone of silence on this issue, and good people are not speaking for whatever reason, how can people who are right on the front lines have enough courage to be able to speak? They're doing it anyway, and I think actually they're doing it much more than we give them credit for or that we see. But in a sense, I think if we want this to be a visible global movement, we all need to play our parts. And by we, the movement I represent and I belong to is not just anyone against Sharia. It's everyone against Sharia, against religion's roles in society, against religion and political power. Yes, you can't compare Islam today with Christianity today because it's been pushed back. But Giordano Bruno was also hung for heresy in 1600. The Inquisitor's handbook said very clearly that no one is to be found innocent whatsoever, and that if someone confessed, what would happen then is they would be killed before they were burnt alive. That would be their, their pat on the back for having confessed. So I think, in fact, if you look at Islamism, it is very much like the Inquisition of Christianity, very much the same. No one is innocent. No one is innocent. And they will kill and murder in order to promote their ideology. It's political as well. It's interesting that you would say Christianity is just a religion here in Denmark when it's part of the state. In Britain, just a religion. Just a religion, I don't think so. I mean, I think in fact, when it's just a religion is when it's a private matter. Of course, people have a right to their religious beliefs. They can believe in anything they want. But as part of the state, as part of the educational system, as part of the judicial system, it's a no. It's a no. And the fight against Sharia, in my opinion, is a fight for today's enlightenment and for today's secularism. And we need allies in this fight to push back both Islamism and the far right, to push back religion and its role in the public space. And we have to do that. We have to do that. We have no choice. And there are people who are fighting this fight in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in North Africa, in the Arab Spring. And we need to be standing with them. We need to be standing with them. And we could change how things look like we wouldn't believe. When the Iranian government, the Islamic Republic of Iran, was established, and Islamism rose and took political power, the world became much darker and bleaker. The Arab Spring, the protests in Iran have a chance of changing that and making that area the center of secularism and humanism worldwide. It's possible. It's possible. And those people are out there doing what they need to do. Are we doing our bit? Thank you. What time is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, if one more round maybe, if anybody wants to.
Der spørgsmål fra salen her?
Hello. Excuse me. As you started out by saying, I agree that there's a difference between the human rights agenda against Islamism and the right-wing agenda against Islamism. But do you have any advice in Western Europe, where the discourse is very much a right-wing discourse, on how to keep these issues from being taken over, so you are seen to be supporting a right-wing issue when your stance is purely humanitarian and human rights?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I agree with you that while I would think that it's still true that very few are racist, actually, but then I agree with you that a lot of the right-wing agenda, that, you know, they still have their own religious agenda and want to discriminate, and can be very bad, at least the far right. And that we need to take the path of secularism, and we need to criticize all religions. I agree with all that. However, I would like to say that I believe that there are differences in... I hate Christianity as much as the next guy, but I still think that Islam is worse, and that the words of the Quran is worse than what is in the Bible, at least when you look at, you know, the whole picture. I think when you look at the Old Testament, a lot of what is said is really, really bad and comparable to what is in the Quran, but at least you have the New Testament, which is bad also, but not as bad, and I think the Quran is just more direct in its approach to how you should live your life, and that is a real reason. My question is a real reason to why there's the difference, why there's more problems in the Islamic world. My question is, would you agree or disagree with that as Islam, there is a real difference in Islam and Christianity, and that is a real cause for the differences in how we live today? And that's because I mean, for example, people like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, they agree with this, and they also heavily criticize Christianity. But are you with them in the fact that, you know, there are differences in these religions also?
I'm sorry, I think I missed some of your speech where you spoke a bit about the burger. So I would like to ask if you are for or against banning the burger. That was it.
And the last.
Could I come back to
the last one here?
Going back to the question of the mosque, the people who want to build this mosque, we may not like them, we may be worried, but they are a legal organization in this country. And the only way you can stop a legal organization from building a building is if it doesn't comply to building regulations in this country. Now, one of the reasons that we are secularists and is that we support human rights, and one of the basic rights is the freedom of worship. So I would warn against tampering with human rights issues because we have worries, and well-founded worries, I would like to add, against a certain organization. We can do all kinds of other things. We can ask our security service to monitor these people. We can picket them if they, and we can do many things. But I don't think we should tamper with their fundamental rights of worship. I would strongly warn against that.
Okay, last one.
Yeah. Hello. Okay, my name is Jeffrey. It's about the question on immigration. I don't think anybody says that all Muslims support Sharia, but the problems we have in Europe now come from Muslim immigration. And without that, we wouldn't have had these problems. That was my little 5 cents.
Okay. Okay. Should we agree that that's the last round of questions? Is that okay? So, but if I make someone angry and they have to come and speak, what are we going to do? That's what we should agree now. Is that okay? Or, yeah? Because otherwise you'll be here all night listening to me. I'm going to try this immigration thing one more time, just because it's fun. Look, Dr. Shipman in Britain killed a whole lot of his patients. We don't then say that we need to get rid of doctors and they're all a source of problems in Britain. No, exactly, exactly. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of football hooligans in Britain who cause violence and terrorize people and get drunk and do horrible things. No one comes up with the idea of, what can we do with these football hooligans? Send them back to where? The issue is that immigrants never seem to belong to this society. You always look at them as foreign, even if they've lived in these countries for generations. When can we stop being foreign, please? When can we stop being foreign? The issue is that any social or political problem in a given society is addressed by giving political and social solutions, not by scapegoating people. Not by scapegoating people. If 90% of the people who carried out riots in London are poor and working class, you can't ship out everyone who's poor and working class. You can't do that. You can't do that. But when it comes to immigrants, it becomes very easy and non-racist. We're not racist. We just think immigrants are the source of all of our problems. There's a problem there. There's a problem there. And what the problem is that anti-immigration, anti-asylum policies have become so mainstream that it is respectable now for people to sit there and say that they're not being racist, but they're just scapegoating, immigrants. Well, I have a problem with that. I think if there's a social problem, deal with the social problem. If Islamism is a political problem, deal with Islamism, because there are Islamists in Denmark, in Britain, in America, that are born and bred in Denmark, Britain, and America. They are born and bred in it. It's a political movement. It's like saying, you want to get rid of the neo-Nazis in Britain, well, let's send them back to Germany. First of all, they don't even come from Germany, most of them. Many of them may not even have been Muslims to begin with. Let's say when we're talking about Islamism. A lot of them might be converts. Stop scapegoating people to address a social and political problem. That's the first thing. And I think that's what the far right does, and that's why they need to be opposed. On the issue of freedom of worship. Oh, okay. Now, I guess this is where you're a secularist. We are part of the same movement. And this is where my head bangs against the wall. And with the far right, I don't see them as being my movement, and therefore it's very easy to write them off. But when it comes to secularists and women's rights campaigners and humanists, I find that there's a huge, shrugging of the shoulders and saying that, well, this is religious freedom. This is the right to wear what they want, the burqa. This is Sharia courts, people's right to freedom of religion. The mosque, it's not about a mosque. It's being funded by Islamic Republic of Iran that has assassinated hundreds of opponents, that has annihilated an entire generation, that is spearheading Islamism across the world. Well, it's got to do with buildings, and it's got to do with, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. It's not good enough for me. It might be good enough for you, but it's not good enough for me. I think we need to be a lot more wary and a lot more concerned and see the task that we have ahead of us and the responsibility we have to Iranian exiles who are going to be threatened as a result of that mosque.
And forbid it?
I'm sorry?
Forbid?
Don't forbid mosques.
But
but forbid funding from the Saudi government for schools that are used to say X and Y is a pig and X and Y is a monkey, and don't mix with non-Muslims, and who beats children day in and day out. It would be considered child abuse if it was done in any other school, but because it's an Islamic school, it's all right. There are films of Islamic schools in Britain where children are being beaten, and they're still open for business. Why? Because it's Saudi funded. It's funding matters. Funding matters. It's like saying, you know, you're living during, there's fascism in the world, you know, there's Nazi Germany, and then they're building a center with Nazi Germany money, and you say, well, it's just a building. It's got to apply, you know, abide by building regulations, and, you know, that's not our business. It's not enough. It's not enough to do that. And the issue is also that secularism is not the end all, and, you know, the burqa ban is not secularist, but I'll defend it. Because I'm not secularist for the sake of being secularist. I'm secularist because I think it's a prerequisite to defend people's rights. And the burqa is a symbol of women's oppression and repression like nothing else. Like nothing else. It's a mobile prison. It's a mobile prison. How can you say that people have a right to wear it? How can you do that? It's like saying that people have a right to wear the chastity belt. It's like saying people have a right to foot binding, where their feet are broken and so they can't wander too far away from their male guardian. How can you say foot binding is a form of shoe wear? How can you say the burqa is a form of clothing? But you have very good secularists and humanists standing up to defend the right to wear the burqa. In the latest conference on secularism, you had someone saying that we should put the right to wear the burqa in the secularist manifesto. It's not only about secularism. It's not only about secularism.
Can I say something?
Sorry, no.
But when you cross the line of the freedom of choice and putting something by force, because we have the same exact discussion in our movement.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow that, only because everyone's going to start attacking it, throwing things at me. I know how this works. I know how this works. I've got to control my audience. So I'm not going to let you do that, but I'll address that. See, the thing is, people might choose to do a lot of things. There are people, and we know them, who actually believe that they should deny children medical attention because God's got to look after them. There are people like that. There are people who choose to mutilate their daughters. And they do it because they love their daughters. I don't deny that. They want their daughters to have the best thing possible. But too bad. Too bad. Because choice, your choice, often conflicts with someone else's choice. You want to smoke. You can't do it in a public place because it's a health hazard. And religion is a health hazard as well. It's a hazard for social health. It's a hazard. And so we need to keep it out. We need to keep it out. People's choices are important. People's choices are important. But there is a limit to people's choices and freedoms. You can't smoke wherever you want. You can't mutilate your daughter whenever you want. You can't force her into marriage when you want. You can't kill her in the name of honor when you want. And there are times that you choose to do something. There was a study done by the Oriental Studies Department in Mumbai, India. They did a study of 40 women who had done sati, you know, where women jump on the burning pyres of their husbands, yeah? They did a study, an academic study, mind you, and they found, academically, that out of the 40 women, only 2 were forced. The rest were choices. It was voluntary. It was voluntary. And then they went on in their report to explain, well, in the West, they allow suicide. It's not illegal. And in the West, there's support for euthanasia. Very different things. Very different things. And that's why when you are living under an Islamic Inquisition, when you are dealing with a movement that throws acid in the faces of girls who want to go to school, don't tell me the burqa is a form of choice. Don't tell me that, because it's not true. It's not true. That's it. Sorry, I'm not going to go on about this. And finally, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Someone asked me that. What are we going to do? No, I don't think I can help you. I'm sorry. I mean, what are we going to do? Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. What are we going to do is, I think, first of all, we've got to come to acknowledge the fact that it's not all simple, yeah? You can be against the banning of conspicuous religious symbols in schools because it is an act of secularism, removing religious symbols from schools and proselytizing and so on from schools. And you know, for example, I'm not against the banning of the veil of adult women. I'm not against that. Even though I think it's a symbol of oppression and suppression, and even though I think the choice is not really a choice, the burqa is different. The burqa, you know what the burqa is, don't you? You know what we're talking about. Yeah. Come on, that's not a hijab. That's just it's like saying that, you know, a black South African had to come through a different entrance, but under Islam, women have to actually carry their separate entrance on their backs so that they never ever have to mix and be seen. And the health risks related to that, the lack of sunshine on people's bodies, the depression that women get, there is so much of that in countries where veiling is compulsory. But anyway, what we can do, I think first and foremost, we need to speak about these issues. And we need to also, in speaking about them, look at the complexity of it, about the far right, about the realities of racism, about Islamism as a political movement, about cultural relativism, multiculturalism. I think it's really important to have these discussions. But I also think it's really important to just say something, to make a stand, I think it is so crucial to make that stand, even if you are standing alone on the middle of the street and shouting and no one can hear you. You know, I'm being funny, but no, I'm not being funny because I'm never funny. I can't make a proper joke. But what I mean is just this act of being able to speak about it and to start making it part of the discussion in the public space. That's not all about the far right and anti-immigration. You know, I think that's really key. And also I think joining campaigns like One Law for All. The thing that struck me when I went to Australia recently was the number of people who told me that they were so happy to find a campaign against Sharia that was not making them feel dirty for going on to far-right websites. And I think, in a sense, this is the thing about the One Law for All campaign, giving people the space to criticize Sharia law, criticize Islamism, criticize religion's role in society, but at the same time defend the unequivocal rights of everyone. Everyone is a citizen and should be treated as such. Everyone deserves universal rights, not just in Denmark and Britain, but everywhere. So I guess I'm telling you to join the One Law for All campaign and send us lots of money and buy our books. But seriously, I think there's a lot of work to be done, and part of these discussions are what helps start opening up the debate and going into the complexities of the issue. So I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have, and thank you so much for coming. Was it okay? Good.